Okay, guys, what we'll do is we'll hold questions to where you're really confused. If you're confused, you will stop me, but I just need to cover ground and then the confusion will probably leave you. So if you remember,
Damon,
yeah,
Mr. Fish, give you some feedback.
yeah,
So I spoke to Rabbi Goldschmidt about Chalitza and Yibum. So they're both Deraita, and Chalitza is definitely still practiced today. With Yibum, it's practiced by Sephardi and not by Ashkenaz, because when it was codified a few hundred years ago, the Ashkenazi posek said that people are doing it for the wrong reason, and it wasn't felt appropriate that they continue with it.
okay,
But Safari didn't have that restriction. Um,
interesting.
I, there is, however, one incident which happened, must have been not too long ago, where Yibum was actually performed for Ashkenazi. What happened was the guy was an amputee, so they couldn't do Chaletza. So they did Yibum, he married the girl, and then the next day they got divorced.
Okay, interesting. So
So,
that's
yeah,
very interesting, Lance, because it seems as though it's held with the status same as divorce. So it's that serious. It's just that's why it's put in the same category. That's very interesting. Thank you for asking, Rabbi Goldschmidt. What else did you want to say? It's very interesting.
just that, just the feedback, yeah.
The one thing I don't get, and I believe Rabbi Goldschmidt, where he says that they're both derisa, is the Gemara said for some reason it's not. The enforcing is rabbinic. It might be that it comes down to derisa, but the breaking of which is rabbinic, which is why the question is asked in Tosfot about it being a problem on the same level as a divorcee for a Cohen. And the reason that it's given is because on a practical level, it has the same mechanism to strip somebody of their Cohen status when a father marries either a chalutza or divorcee. And I believe Rabbi Goldschmidt. So there might be two different uh, um, opinions in terms of
Yes,
how it plays out of enforcement.
look, it makes a lot of sense that it's a riser, because if it was kept um, by Yehuda and Tamar, and it was kept by Boaz, um, that was before there was the writer, or sorry, before there was the Rabbanan. So they wouldn't have been keeping laws from the sages in biblical times.
I hear that completely. I'm just saying, Tosfot doesn't seem to hold by that, and I'll show you the notes at which Kevin said that it's not so clear. However, I do believe that probably Chalutza is biblical, but maybe enforcing it in certain parameters is rabbinic as opposed to a divorcee of a status. In other words, it's not seen in certain halachic applications, even though it's a derisive source, to be maybe extenuating an application like a divorcee in the same case. In other words, a Yisrael can marry a Kulutza as well as a divorcee, but it might have certain implications in terms of inheritance that are different or a myriad of other factors. I don't know. I need to show Rabbi Goldschmidt this issue of Tosfot's opinion in terms of being rabbinic. And I believe you that he said it's derisive, so it must be in certain applications it's rabbinic, even though it comes from a Torah source. In other words, even when we look at certain laws like Shabbos, where you've got avos and toldos, toldos are your um, almost your subcategories, and the avos the major categories. That major categories are derisa, and the toldos are still, to a certain extent, death penalty offenses, even though they're rabbinic. Do you get what I'm saying? Because they fit within that subcategory, such as watering instead of planting. Does that make sense? So I
Look,
need
it's
to.
a different kind of look. This isn't the technicality. Gibbon isn't something. It's an actual
Lance, I
There's no
understand, but
there's no
Tosfot
two ways
is, of course,
there's no two ways of doing it. There's only one way of doing it. It's not an interpretation of anything. That's it. That's halacha, which was done for the past
Lance, with
3,000 years.
respect, if Tosfot has a problem with it, Tosfot knows what he's doing. I respect Rabbi Goldschmidt, so I need to show him this Tosfot, who
Yeah,
said that basically, even though the one is biblical and the other one is rabbinic, it still has the same effect, and therefore the Adam Zimmerman get the reciprocal penalty either way, because that they practically did by causing this Khan to try and be stripped of his status by saying his father married a chulutza versus a divorcee. There is a biblical versus Durabanan application difference, but what they sought to do to him was exactly the same. Therefore, they get the reciprocal punishment, even though one's Durabanan. I don't think Tosfot is making it up. I think there might be a difference. And when I bring it to Rabbi Goldschmidt, there might be some application. In other words, it's both derived from the pasuk, but it might have different levels of application that are rabbinic as opposed to leniencies as opposed to biblical. Tosfot must have known what he was doing. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm reading Tosfot,
yeah.
so I would need to.
Okay.
I
Yeah,
need
you have
to.
to go to an expert to get this
Yeah,
sorted
and I
out.
know Rabbi Goldschmidt knows what he's doing. So if I bring this Tosfot to him, he might do exactly what Lance has said quite correctly, and um, say that these are the applications when it applies. Otherwise, it wouldn't bring up. Lance is just joining his computer's frozen.
But you also
Or
make
you
a
can
good
also
point,
speak to
Damon,
Rabbi.
the fact that there could be different rabbinical applications. So I think just speak to Rabbi Goldsmith. He's a pro at this. He'll resolve this matter for us. So.
Yeah. So Lance, firstly, let's just wait for Lance to get on. Lance, can you see us?
Yes.
Yeah. So listen, firstly, a big thank you for speaking to Rabbi Goldschmidt. Gavin, he is one of the top Talmud Chachamim in the country, but obviously Tosfot knows what he's doing. So he might say in terms of the fact that it's derived derisa, but certain applications are rabbinic in nature compared to a divorcee. There has to be a difference, otherwise Tosfot wouldn't have brought it up.
100%.
So I don't know what it is, Lance, but I tell you what the practicality is. A lot of what we learnt in Bava Kama, we simply don't know how it applies today. So you've got the Mishnah Brura, and they're able to codify according to Ashkenazim, and you've got the Shulchan Aruch, and they come out with a halacha from what we learn in the Gemara. So I don't know how any of these dafs that we learnt in Bava Kama apply in halacha today, but that's what the Mishnah Brura is for, and that's why we do Dirshu. But Lance, firstly, a big thank you for asking Rabbi Goldschmidt. I really appreciate it because I actually didn't know if how it applied today.
You can
Now, I
speak to
just want to,
Rabbi
yeah,
Cohen as well, eh? You can speak to Rabbi Cohen as well.
yeah, Rabbi Cohen would know being a Cohen. It would be a point of interest. That's true. And actually, since he knows Shas pretty well, it's a good idea to speak to him about this Tosfot because he's aware of it. That's actually a lovely idea,
You
specifically
can
because
ask any of those guys. They all got the answer.
no, but because he's Cohen sensitive and sometimes he's a little bit more chilled. All right. So I want to teach one thing I want to ask you guys, if you don't mind, is I want Kevin to teach now for like 2 or 3 minutes, and then I want to send a new link because Lance, we did need it answered, but I just have a certain segment to go through very quickly. So Kev, you want to get yours now, and then I'll link
Yes, that's an idea. Well, it's
you.
an idea, and it's going to be also a little bit political, but that ties in. It's political in terms of biblical policy, politics, should we say? So anyway, so in the last week's parsha, or 2 week parshas ago, in this upcoming parsha, Abraham and Sarah had left Haran. They wanted to leave Haran, and then she gets notified at the age of 90 that she's going to have a son. But on their way, Pharaoh takes a liking to her because she was a very beautiful woman. And he had a dream that he was warned not to touch her. Otherwise there would be consequences for him. And then not long after that, one or two parashas later, Abimelech, who was one of the kings, also actually he kidnapped her, and him and his household were afflicted with a virus or some sort of plague. And I was just thinking about this yesterday, that if you mess with the Jewish people, Hashem will punish you. And why I'm going to get political now is, you've heard of instances where certain governments of the world have done negative things to Israel, or have proposed negative things to Israel. Negative consequences have happened, such as the Louisiana hurricane many years ago. And recently, there were floods in Spain last week. I don't know if you saw devastating floods in Valencia and in the rural areas, because Spain is one of the most anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian, pro-ICC court case proponents, and they were going to promote this case. And this is now, they've been clapped now, because this case is a lot of nonsense and lies and libel and blood libel against our people. So now they can have something to be busy with instead of nonsense like the ICC court case, because they go against the Jewish people.
Good. Just one thing back to what Lance was saying. Lance, if you have a look on Schottenstein in the art scroll, in daf 2a, at the bottom there are insights, okay? One of the things it notes is the Ramban, Nachmanides, and the Ritva basically are both in agreement that they basically say some authorities assert that the biblical penalty of lashes can apply only to witnesses who attempted to impose a biblical disqualification on a Kohen, but not if the disqualification is only rabbinic in nature. So it says, thus, if they testified that a Kohen was the son of a divorced woman, a biblical disqualification, the son of a divorced woman, they are subject to lashes. But since the son of a chulutza is disqualified only by rabbinic law, the false witnesses cannot be subject to this biblical penalty. The reason why this is mentioned, the two together in the Mishnah, is because they're similar in that they have the same sort of ramification to the Kohen that's stripped of his status. According to the Rambam now, Maimonides, there seems to be a bit of a disagreement, and that even though he holds that although the disqualification is only rabbinic, the practical effect has an issue. So in other words, Ramban says for the chulutza, they don't get lashes instead of the reciprocal penalty, and the Ritva has a question on that. And the Rambam Maimonides says that it has a practical effect only, even though it's only rabbinic. So the fact of it is that if they bring this up, and it's in Yevamos 44a, there's obviously a question as to whether it's biblical or not. Not to say that Tamar and Yehuda, this issue didn't occur, but in terms of its halakhic ramifications. So I don't know. I need to speak to Rabbi Cohen, because it's there in the Gemara for everybody to see, guys. You can see it in the notes. I had to actually, while Lance was speaking, physically look it up. So Lance, it's there in writing. So I'm curious. You got me. By the way, Lance, thanks for speaking to Rabbi Goldschmidt. I really appreciate it. I'm actually going to bring this to him with the Tosfot and the Gemara in writing and ask him if he can kind of resolve it.
Yeah.
He knows what he's doing. I have no idea. I'm just confused. I only know the Gemara. I don't know why there's all the different opinions between the Ritva, the Ramban, and the Rambam and Rashi, and why there's such confusion. Since he seems clear, so he obviously knows how it's brought down in halacha, which will probably come down to Maimonides, probably, irrespective of the other opinions. All right, guys. So the Gemara has asked two questions. So the question that we left with on Thursday was as follows. It says, look, seemingly there seems to be a problem, because it says in the Mishnah, in what manner do witnesses not become zomimim? Is the way it should have been stated. Why? Because it starts off the Mishnah and it says, in what manner two witnesses become zomimim, and it brings two cases in where the reciprocal penalty cannot be applied. One is that if the person happens to be a Cohen and testifying against another Cohen, he's not stripped of his kahuna status, even though he sought to strip this Cohen of his status, and they were caught to be conspiring or plotting witnesses. They're given lashes instead, which did open up the fact that even a Yisrael can testify against a Cohen. And what this means is not in all cases where they testify against a Cohen are the Eidim Zomimim. It's just bringing this case if a second set of witnesses happen to have said that one or both of the witnesses were somewhere else at the time when they turned around and said this young Cohen's parents, they were aware that they were there at the mother's first wedding. So therefore, when she married the father, she must have either been still married or divorced, which would have excluded that marriage to a Cohen, and therefore that younger Cohen would have lost his status. And the court says, great, what date was she married to her first husband? And he says, for example, the 26th of January 1986. And quite clearly then the other couple said, listen, it couldn't have been the case because you were still with us in Plettenberg Bay. So in that particular case, if he's a Cohen, he doesn't get stripped of his Cohen status, he gets lashes. But that also opens the field that there's skin in the game, or something with what to lose is considered being beaten with corporal punishment of lashes, meaning even a normal Yisrael that can't be stripped of his Cohen status is entitled to testify. It doesn't mean that everybody's testifying or conspiring witnesses. It just means that in order to give testimony in the 41st daf of Sanhedrin, they have to be subject to some sort of reciprocal punishment. Now, Tosfot's question, as you remember, is does it have to be zamam punishment, which means exactly the reciprocal penalty in order to have skin in the game or something to lose? Or can it be any sort of deterrent that would preclude somebody from probably giving false testimony, and therefore that would suffice for them to have skin in the game and not get cute and plot against an innocent person? So the Gemara is now brought, that is the first case where the Kohen isn't stripped of his Kohanic status, kahuna, even though he intended to do that to the victim upon being caught of plotting. The second case was a case of exile, where we say we do not say that this false witness should suffer exile in his place, although this is what he intended to make his victim suffer. Rather, he suffers the penalty of the 40 lashes. So the Gemara basically says, it starts off the Mishnah and says, in what manner to zomimim witnesses become zomimim? And the Gemara is saying, well, what are you talking about? You want to set a tone and say, listen, there's a concept called reciprocal punishment, and that's the classic case of the punishment meted out to a plotting witness. And then you're giving us two cases at which it doesn't apply, the very two cases that you give us. So it's a problem. So how do you start off with exceptions to the rule? You're trying to lay out the okay, Lance, are you with me?
Yes.
Sorry.
But I'm hearing my own voice bounce back. So one of those.
Yeah.
It's good to see you twice. I can only hear myself once. But you're going to have to get rid of one of them. Okay, good. Brendan, did you have a question? Was it you that had a question, or?
No, I just heard the echoing and I wasn't sure what was causing it.
Yeah, it was Lance appearing twice and you hearing me twice. So in effect, the Gemara is saying the first problem that you've got is when you want to state the case, you don't state the exception to the rules. That's the first thing. The Gemara said the second problem that you've got is that when you go to the fifth daf of Makkot, it's going to set out that if a second set of witnesses said to the original witnesses, how can you testify about the event that you claim to have seen when on that day you were with us in another place? The original witnesses are established then as zomimim, which are plotting witnesses, and they're now subject to hazama, which is the reciprocal penalty. So this implies that if it has to set it up in the fifth daf, this is not the case of Zomamim. So if the later Mishnah in the fifth daf teaches the mechanics as well as the punishment of Zomamim witnesses, why does the Tana pose this question here too? So the Gemara says, look, you've got to look at the order of the Mishnahs, not the order of the Gemara, because when Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi redacted the Mishnah, you had a different sets of order that are still applicable in the Mishnah today. So when we learned with Rav Simcha Steinhauer that the 11th chapter of Sanhedrin, which was Chelek, which is the world to come, and those that forfeit their world to come, and it talks about messianic times, that does not appear in the last chapter of the Mishnayos. It only appears in the Gemara. And what actually happens is that Makkot is an extension of the 10th chapter, because what happens in the 10th chapter is it details crimes meriting capital punishment, particularly by strangulation, which is hanging, by the way. Okay? If you want to know what some of the other chapters are, in chapter 7, it deals with the 4 types of capital punishment. And then we deal with this issue, as you know, has been Soira and Moira with the 7th chapter. I'm not going to go through the whole of Sanhedrin, but it's saying in order to get a context of how it lays out, even though this is the first time we're seeing it in Makkos and it deals with Eidim Zomamim exclusively, it appears first in Sanhedrin because that's in the order, and this Makkos is the exact extension of it without Chelek being a chapter in between, so that would add clarity. And since in Sanhedrin we were dealing with the case of a Kohen with Eidim Zomamim, we're going to be dealing with a case here of a Kohen, so it follows seamlessly. By the way, in Bava Kama, we dealt with monetary cases where there were conspiring witnesses and they had to pay monetary payment that they sought to inflict on the victim. But Bava Kama did come at a different time juncture to Sanhedrin. So that's something you've got to know. Now, what I want to do is I want to share my screen, Sanhedrin, to give those that never learned it a little bit of a understanding of what's brought up, and it'll make complete sense to you. Okay. So tell me when it appears on your screen, guys.
Yeah, it's on.
Okay. So you have here one who cohabits with a married woman. Once she has entered the domain of her husband for marriage, even though she has not yet cohabited with him, one who cohabits with her adulterously is subject to death by strangulation. Okay? So that sets out the tone even before we give Eidim Zomamim. So in other words, it first tells you what happens as far as adultery is concerned. Okay, that's always set out first. Then it says the Zomamim witnesses of the daughter of a Kohen, as well as one who cohabits with her adulterously, are all subject to strangulation. For the rule is that all that are proven to be Zomamim advance to that very death that they sought to impose upon their victim. With the exception of the Zomamim witnesses of the daughter of a Kohen and one who cohabits with her, as well as the partner. So what are we trying to say here? So the first thing that we're trying to say is marriage under Torah law is effected in 2 stages. You've got Irusin, and Irusin is the betrothal aspect of what we call now I suppose you'd call it today engagement, but today the Irusin and Nesuin, which is a full marriage. The Irusin is the betrothal aspect, and the Nesuin is actually done together under the chuppah, because they don't want a time period between the engagement or the betrothal and the full marriage, because things might happen. So they want somebody to only be halachically obligated in one time without having this stretched. Now, adulterous relations with a betrothed Naira are subject to death by stoning. Okay? And where's that? That was in Sanhedrin in the 66b Mishnah. Gavin, you already joined Sanhedrin by that stage, by the way. So in other words, it's classifying the difference between adulterous relations with a Naira and adultery with a fully married woman. and that's punished by strangulation. So the first question you might ask yourself is, why is it a little bit more hectic with regards to somebody as a nara? So I just want to fill you in what a nara is. I don't know if you guys,
Damon,
Kevin, did you say something?
a nara is a young woman, so how could it be adultery with a young woman who's not married? Why are they using, unless she's been betrothed?
Well,
That's what I wanted to
it's
ask
a
you.
good question, and I'll tell you why. So a nara, in simple terms, is a maiden, but a
Yeah.
nara is still considered halachically a gedola. So you've got a nara and a bogeret. So a nara is considered a maiden, and a bogeret is a mature woman, but they both go under the subcategory of a gedola, which is somebody that's able to get married. So then you've got a case of what you call a katana, or tanoket, which is a minor. So that's a child under 12. Now, a child under 12 cannot get married. And a child, well, what we consider a child now and biblically were two different things, because one of the factors that came in was physiological development or endocrinological development. So a Nara would be considered that stage if she had hit 12 years old and had a minimum of 2 pubic hairs. And she was in that state for 6 months. After the 6 months, when she became 12 and a half, she was considered a bogeret, which is a fully fledged woman. Okay. So the thing of it is, the reason why it was considered a more hectic death penalty than the person having relations with her, um, uh, basically is because she was either living in her father's house or under the father's jurisdiction. So that sort of embarrassment required a more stringent death penalty to her, even if she wasn't a Kohen. It was any woman that was considered still within the category of an adult, but living legally under her father's house. So that gets a much more hectic death penalty, both for her and the adulterer, and that is stoning. And we went through that case, Gavin, where if she slept with 10 men, and basically it was vaginal intercourse, all 10 men would be stoned and she'd be stoned. And if it was anal or non-vaginal, the first man would be stoned and she'd be stoned, and the rest would basically get strangled. So we went through all of this. But bottom line is it's adultery either way. But adultery with a fully married woman is only punished by strangulation. When I say only, it's less hectic than stoning, but it's certainly not as hectic as being burnt. So basically, the state of Nisuin takes effect, which is the full marriage. It's not just the betrothal part. When a betrothed woman enters her husband's premises for the purpose of completing the marriage, it's known as chuppah today. Now, obviously, in order to consummate the marriage, you needed what you call beer. Now, when I said to Rav Simcha, what does it mean? They need alcohol. He said, no, beer is sexual relations. No, I said, I don't know. I don't know what it was.
Oh, you didn't know? Yeah, I know, because it's
In other
pronounced
words,
the same
even if
way.
sexual
Yeah.
relations didn't take place between the husband, she was still, even in the Erusin, in the betrothal stage, way before the Nisuin, the full marriage, it was still considered adultery. And even if she was up to 12 and a half, with 2 pubic hairs, she was considered liable as far as that's concerned. So the Mishnah teaches that the changeover in her status doesn't depend on the formality of chuppah, but basically on her entrance into the domain of her husband. So that can take place independently of chuppah, when the father entrusts her to the emissaries of her husband to bring her to him for the completion of the marriage. Okay. And it's in Ketubot 48b. You remember, and you remember the reason for the distinction is that the Torah decrees stoning for a betrothed Nara for adultery committed in her father's house. So where was that, guys? That was in Devarim chapter 22, verse 21. So once her father has entrusted her to the husband's emissaries to go to the place of chuppah, once she's on the way to the chuppah, she actually departed her father's house. So although she's only still betrothed, it's less embarrassing to the father, and her adultery is treated like that of a fully married woman and subject to strangulation, not stoning. Okay. So we're saying, well, how does this basically relate? So that has to that relates to the actual process of adultery. Now, when we're talking about the Zomimim witnesses of the daughter of a Cohen, as well as the one who cohabits with her adulterously, are all subject to strangulation. It says, for the rule is that all are proven to be Zomimim advanced to the very death they sought to impose upon their victim, with the exception of the Zomimim witnesses of the daughter of the Cohen and the one who cohabits with her as well. Okay. So, this is what you've got to bear in mind. In Vayikra, in Leviticus chapter 1, verse 9, the daughter of a Cohen is subject to death by burning if she commits adultery. And the man with whom she sinned is subject to death by strangulation. So, witnesses who testified falsely that a Cohen's daughter committed adultery are subject, guys, to which death penalty and why? I'm going to take off the screen now. We don't need the screen now. You get the gist of it. Guys,
Which death penalty? What type of death penalty?
Yeah, in other words, the Adam Zomimim, this isn't a case where there's a standard adultery that they're testifying to have seen, the Adam Zomimim. They have said that they saw a daughter of a Cohen cohabit with a normal member of Israel. Now, she would get the death penalty of burning, okay? And he would get the death penalty of strangulation because she's already advanced to the husband's emissaries for chuppah, and therefore he's not subject to stoning. He's only subject to strangulation. What death penalty do the Adam Zomimim get and why? Gavin, if you know, don't share because you were doing Sanhedrin. You're smarter out of experience.
40 lashes?
I think it's a bit mild if you want somebody to be burnt and strangled, to be honest. What death penalty do they get? Because it says in the Mishnah I shared with you, they get a death penalty. What should
the head cut off?
Stoning or strangulation, one of the two.
The head cut off.
Hmm?
No,
No?
listen, this is not
Medieval.
this is not evil or medieval. Yeah. So, all right. Guys, what do you think? Do they get burnt or do they get strangled?
Strangled.
Why?
Because the adulteress gets the worst penalty.
So let me ask you something. She does get the worst penalty. It says so. It says that she gets burnt, not because she's an adulteress, but because she is the daughter of a Cohen. She would also get herself strangled if she was a normal Yisrael having adultery with a man. They both get strangled for adultery. She only gets the more hectic death penalty, Brendan, since she's the daughter of a Cohen, which is a much higher status. But what do the Adam Zomimim get? In other words, if they're caught, once the verdict is given, remember Adam Zomimim are only given the reciprocal penalty when the verdict is given, but they haven't yet executed the couple. And the second couple said you couldn't have witnessed the affair because you were with us in a different location. Therefore, what death penalty are we giving to the Adam Zomimim? Do we give them the death penalty they sought to impose on her, which was burning, or what they sought to impose on him, which was strangulation, and why? I don't want to bring up issues of stoning and namarasas and pubic hairs and all sorts of other complicated issues. We learned that in Sanhedrin. I'm not going to go through Sanhedrin. I just want the bottom line of this. Guys, I'm going to give you a clue. Okay? Kim
Can I say something?
Kim Labadi Rabamine. Gavin, don't give it because you were there.
Okay. All right, Sean.
Kim Labadi Rabamine. Guys, we went through it in Bava Kama. If you guys don't know this, it worries me. The two Bava Kama. I don't expect Lance or Brendan to, because they're experts in halacha and other things that I have no clue of. But Arthur and Kevin should know better. Kim Labadi Rabamine.
Okay,
That's
Gavin,
the answer why.
just repeat the thing before that because I was trying to cross the road without killing myself when you were talking. Okay, now I'm sitting down.
Listen, you're right. There's no
Just
death penalty
because-
for not listening to the share. I agree with you.
No, it's not kind of like I was like trying
That
to get
could be a
across
bit
on you.
egocentric to want something like that. Okay. So
By the way, Damon, I just realized something how beer came about, right? She came back the one night and she's what happened? She said, I don't know, they gave me this funny liquid. Let's call it beer.
exactly. So all right. So Arthur, the answer is Kim Labati Rabba Minay. Kevin, it's that. What did we learn in Bava Kama that meant? And how does it relate here to what death penalty we give the items of I'm giving you answers here, guys. You knew it in Bava Kama. What does Kim Labati Rabba Minay?
From a
What-
okay, Arthur, you have a go.
no, my mind's blank at the moment. I
Is
was like,
It's deriving
Is it
a similar out at from a I don't know how you derive you get you if there's a from a similar
oh,
source you
No,
get
no, that's
a similar
Kavahomera
outcome
Dayu.
from another
That's
source. Is that right,
Kavahomera
Damon?
Dayu. No. That's
Is it Dayu? Sorry, that's Dayu. Yeah,
no,
yeah.
Dayu's restrained Kavahome is even more so. It's a ilfutoriori argument. This here we're talking about is Kim Labati Rabamine. Anybody got an answer? Anybody at this stage?
is it the similar punishment that they wanted to impose?
No, that's always items on them. All right, guys, let me explain to you what Kim Labati Rabamine is. You always suffer the penalty greater than it, which means we discussed this when we first started this year. If a Jew, if Ruvain burns a Picasso on Shabbos with two witnesses giving Hazron
oh, yeah.
warning, and he's subject to a 20 million rand fine for burning the Picasso, but breaks Shabbos with the exact same timeline, which is subject to the death penalty. Which penalty does he get? Does he pay the monetary payment first? Hang on, before they kill him, or does his estate pay it and he dies? Or does he just pay one? Or which one does he pay? Or does he do both? What's the story? What's Kim Labor?
Okay. He can only pay the one because, well, basically, you can only pay one. He can't pay twice. So basically, if death
He
penalty
can
for Shabbos,
technically in that case. He can. He can.
Yeah,
In
but
other words, you can't kill a person twice.
Okay.
I'll give you that. But what you
Okay.
can do is if a guy triggered a 20 million rand damage, you can make him pay whatever he can pay from his estate with his heirs before you kill him, or take it from the estate when the insurance comes due and kill him. You can technically do both. The one is a monetary compensation, and the other issue is a death penalty for breaking Shabbos under the same simultaneous act. You could technically make them pay both. Why don't you? And how does it relate here?
Don't you?
Lance, any ideas? Brendan, any ideas? Come on, guys. You know this. We went through it the other day. We went through it last Tuesday.
Don't you go for the more harsher punishment, the one that one applies first?
Yes.
Is that what it is? Am I right, Damon?
Yes. So what actually happens is you've got to look through the eyes of Kapora, which is atonement. So what happens is the lesser penalty is waived for the greater penalty in a simultaneous time act, which means
I see.
if there are two death penalties, what should happen in this case, obviously that's why you can't claim any monetary damages from that person's estate or that person for breaking Shabbos, because they get the death penalty and therefore they are not subject to the financial compensation. But in this case, we would think that you give the Eidim Zumamim what? What's more stringent, to burn somebody or to strangle somebody? Listen, nothing's pleasant. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, was a proponent, what's worse, we know that there was a discussion in Sanhedrin with Rabbi Yehuda whether stoning was worse than burning, or whether burning, he said burning was worse, or whether the rabbi said stoning was worse, etc., etc. But the bottom line is strangulation is less severe than hanging than burning. No one wants hot metal down their throat. It's not pleasant. The hanging is just ka-ching. It's like pulling a slot machine. It's quick. So the thing of it is, what should happen here by law is that if there are two different death penalties, in order for the Eidim Zomamim to atone, They should be given the more stringent death penalty under the law of Kimle B'dirabba Minay, which means the more stringent penalty is given and the lesser penalty is waived in that. So they should be getting what? Burnt, because burnt is more stringent than strangulation. It's clear in Sanhedrin and all the sources. Okay. So why are they given strangulation? So I'll go through it. I'll go through it with you. As it says, just as adultery with a Cohen's daughter involves an exception to the reciprocal punishment law of Zomimim witnesses, it also involves an exception to the death penalty law for sexual offenders. Because it says in the 89th daf, the general rules for such offenses is both the man and the woman are subject to the same punishment. And since the exception of the rule is the Cohen's daughter, when it comes to Adim Zomimim, it says in the Gemara, and this is in the 90th daf, A4, the Zomimim witnesses of the daughter of a Cohen, as well as the one who cohabits with her, are subject to strangulation. How do we know these laws? Rav Acha, the son of Rav Ika, said, for a Brisa is taught, what does the Pasuk teach? And I'm going to share it now with you, the Pasuk, guys. Give me 1 second. I want you to read it yourself. I want you to believe me. Okay, Gavri, read it. A single witness, read the whole thing.
This came up. A single witness shall not stand up against any man for any iniquity. Yeah, I've never heard that. Or for any error regarding any sin that he may commit. By the testimony of 2 witnesses or by the testimony of 3 witnesses shall a matter be confirmed. If a false witness stands against a man to speak up spuriously against him, then the 2 men and those who have the grievance shall stand before Hashem, before the Kohanim and the judges, who will be in those days. The judges shall inquire thoroughly, and behold, the testimony was false testimony. He testified falsely against his fellow. You shall do to him as he conspired to do to his fellow, and you shall destroy the evil from your midst. And those who remain shall hearken and fear, and they shall not continue again to do such an evil thing in your midst. The eye shall not pity life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot.
Well read. Okay. So if you remember, Rav Simcha's mentioned this many times. He said, you shall do to him as he conspired to do to his brother. In English, they use modern English, not thou shalt not. You can't kill. They almost colloquialized it. But if you look at the Hebrew, it said, you shall do to him as he conspired to do to his brother. And what does that mean in the Brisa? Is that the word brother is an exclusionary term, that when they condemn both the male and female to the death penalty for sexual punishment, and when they are caught to be conspiring witnesses, what they intended to do to the daughter of a Kohen, whereas they did intend to have her burnt, we can't give them the more severe death penalty, but specifically because of the pasuk, it says because of what they intended to do to the brother, and that involved the male. Do you get what I'm saying? So whatever the male's punishment is what they get. So does that make sense? And we get that directly from the pasuk. Because the Gemara says we do not know whether to give the death penalty to that she committed or that he committed. But because they've been executed by different methods, she by burning and him by strangulation, the question arises why? And it says you've got to look at the pasuk which uses the masculine term brother, Rashi as he explains, and therefore you can only give them one death penalty, so the normal kimle b'dirabba minay doesn't apply because it's a very specific term. And what the ramification is, we strangle the Adim Zomimim, because that was the effect of what the male would have suffered in the death penalty. We don't burn them like what the daughter of the Cohen was going to go through. Does that make sense? And we get that from the pasuk.
Yes.
Okay. Lance, Kevin, Gavin, Arthur, any questions? And we can end now. We don't have to go further. Any questions?
No,
because we used the other recording. I want to stick to the aforementioned time. Guys, any questions at all? Does it make sense to you? Is there any further questions?
No questions from my side.
Okay,
Oh,
so
okay.
so it's fairly straightforward that all that Makkos is trying to say is that since we are starting off on the subject of a Cohen, a daughter of a Cohen being punished, and the issue of Adim Zumimim coming up here, we say, okay, so that's the case with the daughter of a Cohen. What happens if they accuse a Cohen of not really being a Cohen, and that his father married a Chulutza or married a divorcee, and they are seeking to have him stripped of his Cohen status, and then they're caught as being Adim Zumimim? What happens there? Do they lose the Cohen status if they're Cohen, or if they're Israel, are they even allowed to testify? And how come they get 40 lashes? So in other words, it's following on seamlessly from Sanhedrin. That's the point that the Gemara is trying to make. It's not a chop and change. The way we understand it today and the way it's been translated as a chop and change, but it's actually seamlessly when they were giving it over in an oral perspective. In other words, it was on the subject of Adam Zimmerman with Cohen, a bus Cohen, a daughter of a Cohen. And now they say, well, what happens if they want to strip her? Now in the subject of Adam Zimmerman and Cohen, what happens if they want to strip a Cohen of his status? So it's seamless. And the Gemara says it is that reason that they're teaching the exception to the rules now, because they've already laid down the ground rules of what happens to an Adim Zimmerman with reciprocal punishment when it first started, and that was in Sanhedrin. So that dealt with the minor case there in the context of chapter 7, death penalty acts, and chapter 10, which is this particular act of strangulation and when Adim Zimmerman come up. It focuses and expands more on the details of Adim Zimmerman straight into Makkos. That's all it's saying. All right. Clear, guys? Can we go on? I'll see you on Tuesday night at 5:10. I hope the share made sense. And we covered a lot more ground today.
James?
Yeah?
Hold on.